Okay, a monopolistically competitive market is a market that has many buyers and sellers, and each firm produces a different product, whether the differentiation is real or imagined, it doesn't matter. And there is free entry into and exit from the industry. So comparing this to perfect competition, okay, both market structures have many buyers and sellers, but in perfect competition, each firm sells the same or a very similar product, a homogeneous product. And in both market structures, there is free entry and exit, in and out. Okay, so that means that the products are close substitutes, okay, but they're not perfect substitutes. And where a perfectly competitive firm faces the market price as their demand curve, a monopolistically competitive firm faces a downward sloping demand curve. And here's a picture of what's going on. Okay, the picture is identical to the picture or the graph or the model of a monopolistic market structure. Okay, but we have, and the demand curve is drawn with a kind of a similar slope. Okay, but since there are many substitutes, and for a monopoly there is no good substitute, okay, the demand curve will be more elastic than what you see here, which is figure 817 in the textbook. Okay, it's going to be more elastic, but that does not affect our analysis. Okay, so got a downward sloping demand curve, the marginal revenue curve, and the demand curve is linear, which is a simplifying assumption. That gives us a marginal revenue curve that intersects the vertical axis is the same place as the demand curve. And in the middle, the midpoint between the origin in the graph and the horizontal intercept. Okay, and we've got the familiar marginal U-shaped average total cost curve and J-shaped marginal cost curves. And so the monopolistically competitive firm is going to set output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, it will set output and then charge the highest price it can at that output level. And that price is found at the height of the demand curve. And so we have P star. And at that price, if the firm is lucky, its costs will be lower and it'll earn a profit. Okay, but these are short-run profits. Remember, in a monopolistically competitive market, there are no barriers to entry. So competing firms, once they sniff out these profits, can enter into the market and compete for them. Okay, so firms can enter the market and compete away the short-run profits. And if there happens to be losses, just like in a competitive market, some firms will exit the industry in the long run. Okay, so what happens with firm entry is that the demand curve moves from D0 to D1. And the original demand and marginal revenue curves have dashes. And if you can see the color red, then the new demand curve is demand 1. It's colored red and it's a solid line. And the new marginal revenue curve is MR1 and it's a solid line. And so you see the demand curve shifts. Firms will enter and the per firm demand curve for the monopolistically competitive firm gets smaller and smaller. So you got a market demand curve that's equal to X and the number of firms is equal to N. And so the per firm demand curve would be X divided by N. So it gets smaller and smaller as the number of firms increase until we get this, what's called the tangency solution, until the demand curve is just tangent to the average total cost curve. Okay, you can see that when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, the firm sets output at Q star and charges the highest price it can. But at that price, revenues, per unit revenues or price, is just equal to average total cost. And so economic profit is equal to 0 in the long run. So an economist would say the firm is earning a normal economic profit. And here's a cleaned up picture of the long run competitive equilibrium. So in the long run, the conditions are that price is still greater than marginal cost. So an economist would say, well, there's some allocative inefficiency there. The most efficient outcome is when price equals marginal cost. Okay, and the average total cost is greater than the minimum average total cost. Okay, but it might be, there might be a benefit associated or opposite this additional cost to society. And the benefit in a monopolistically competitive market is that we do have product differentiation, whether it's real or perceived, and consumers seem to enjoy product differentiation. Okay, consumers like different styles of clothes, different types of automobiles, different brands of corn cereal. Okay, so the benefits of product differentiation may exceed the cost. Okay, at least when we start talking about antitrust policy, the government has not gone after these little monopolists over their brand. But let's say, imagine that these differences are just perceived, then one of the tasks that a manager has to have in a monopolistically competitive market is that you always have to convince consumers that your product is better than their competitors. So a monopolistically competitive market is characterized by advertising. And you don't see perfectly competitive firms advertising that their product is better than others. So two organic farmers, neither one is probably going to go on TV or put an ad in the paper and say that my organic tomato is better than my rivals. So here's some types of advertising that the textbook describes for you. And we're venturing a little bit too deep into product marketing, the marketing field. And so I'll just let you become familiar with these yourself, and that's where we'll wrap up the discussion of monopolistic competition.